The flames licked hungrily at the cabin's weathered timber as Silas Morgan rode the fence line. Smoke billowed against the evening sky, a black stain on God's canvas. Something pulled at him, instinct perhaps, or fate. Dropping from his saddle, he pulled his bandana over his nose and charged through the doorway. The heat struck like a blacksmith's hammer. Beams cracked overhead as he spotted her, unconscious, elegant even in peril, her clothes too fine for these parts. Outside, she stirred in his arms, revealing eyes that held both fear and command. When she spoke, her accent belonged to no American territory he knew. "I am Elisabetta of Varennia," she whispered, "and you have just saved your future queen. What secret would drive a royal to hide in such wilderness? Before we jump back in, and tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." The morning light spilled across the vast prairie as Silas Morgan saddled his chestnut mare. 3 days had passed since he'd pulled that strange woman from the burning cabin, and her words still echoed in his mind. A queen, she'd claimed, out here, 2,000 miles from anything resembling a royal court. He'd settled her in his modest cabin, taking the barn for himself despite her protests. Old habits from another life. A gentleman doesn't leave a lady to the hay and horses, no matter how peculiar her tale. "You're up with the birds again, Morgan," called a gruff voice. Old Buck limped across the yard, his weathered face creased with a lifetime of sun and wind. At 73, he was the oldest hand on the Whitman spread, and the closest thing to family Silas had known in 15 years. "Cattle don't feed themselves, Buck," Silas replied, checking his saddle cinch. Buck handed him a tin cup of coffee, strong enough to stand a spoon in. "How's your guest faring?" Silas took a careful sip. "Recovering, still talking nonsense about some European kingdom I've never heard of." "Varennia," Buck mused. "Small place, tucked against the Alps. Known for silver mines and fancy wine glasses. Read about it in one of Mr. Whitman's books." Silas raised an eyebrow. "You believe her story?" Buck shrugged. "Stranger things have happened. Remember that Russian fella who showed up claiming to be some kind of duke? Turned out he really was." From his saddlebag, Silas pulled his worn leather journal. He'd kept it faithfully for years, filling its pages with sketches of the landscape, notes on cattle behavior, and the occasional reflection that needed escaping from his head. He jotted down Varennia, the silver mines, before tucking it away. "Again, Mr. Whitman wants the north pasture checked today," Buck said. "Been reports of wolves again." Silas nodded. "I'll ride out after I check on Miss Elisabetta." "Miss Elisabetta, is it?" Buck's eyes twinkled. "Not Your Majesty." Silas offered a rare smile. "Don't you start." The Whitman Ranch sprawled across 5,000 acres of Montana territory, a kingdom in its own right. Thomas Whitman had built it from nothing after the war, turning a modest inheritance into one of the most productive cattle operations this side of the Rockies. He was a fair employer, demanding but reasonable, and he'd given Silas a chance when many wouldn't have. The main house stood on a gentle rise, a 2-story affair of solid timber and stone, with a wide porch wrapping around 3 sides. As Silas approached his cabin nearby, he noticed Sarah Whitman on the porch, her honey-blonde hair catching the morning light. At 28, she was Thomas's only child and heir to everything he'd built. She'd also made it increasingly clear in recent months that she saw Silas as more than just the ranch's most reliable hand. "Good morning, Mr. Morgan," she called, descending the steps with a basket over her arm. "I thought your guest might appreciate some fresh biscuits and preserves." "That's mighty kind, Miss Whitman," Silas said, removing his hat. "But there's no need to trouble yourself." "It's no trouble," she smiled, searching his face. "Father says you pulled her from a fire. How heroic." "Just did what anyone would do." "Not anyone," she countered. "Will you introduce me? The whole ranch is curious about the mysterious foreign lady staying in your cabin." Silas hesitated. Elisabetta had been adamant about meeting as few people as possible. "She's still recovering. Miss Whitman, perhaps another time." Disappointment flashed across Sarah's face. "Of course, her health comes first." She handed him the basket. "Please give her my regards." As Sarah returned to the main house, Silas felt a familiar discomfort. Her interest was flattering but complicated. Thomas Whitman had been clear years ago. His daughter was meant for a businessman or landowner, not a ranch hand with nothing to his name, but a good horse and the clothes on his back. Inside his cabin, Elisabetta sat by the window, wrapped in one of his spare shirts and a blanket. The morning light transformed her from the soot-covered victim he'd rescued into something else entirely. Her dark hair, now clean and braided, framed features too refined for frontier life. Her posture, even seated on his rough-hewn chair, suggested years of training in how to carry oneself with dignity. "Your neighbor's daughter is quite pretty," she observed, her accent giving the words a musical quality. "And quite interested in you." Silas set down the basket. "Miss Whitman was kind enough to bring you breakfast and to inspect the competition." Elisabetta's lips curved in amusement. "I recognize the look." "There's no competition," Silas said firmly. "I'm just a hired hand here. And I am just a displaced royal with assassins on my trail." She unwrapped a biscuit, inhaling its aroma with appreciation. "We all have our burdens to bear, Mr. Morgan." Silas poured water from a pitcher into a basin. "I need to ride out today. Will you be all right alone? I've managed worse in recent weeks." She studied him. "You don't fully believe who I am, do you?" "It's not for me to believe or disbelieve," he replied diplomatically. "Out here, a person is what they prove themselves to be through actions." A refreshingly direct philosophy. She broke the biscuit in half, offering a portion to him. "In my world, appearances and bloodlines dictate everything, while actions are often merely for show." Silas accepted the offering. "Your world sounds complicated." "Unnecessarily so." Her expression grew serious. "Mr. Morgan, I cannot impose on your hospitality indefinitely. Once I've regained my strength, I must continue my journey." "To where?" "Eventually, back to Varennia. But first, to San Francisco. There's a consulate there that can verify my identity and provide assistance." Silas crossed to a trunk at the foot of his bed, retrieving a clean shirt. "That's a long journey for a woman alone." "I've managed thus far," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. Outside, the sound of approaching horses drew Silas's attention. Through the window, he spotted Thomas Whitman riding toward the cabin with two of the younger hands. "Stay inside," he told Elisabetta. "Mr. Whitman doesn't usually come this way without purpose." Stepping onto the porch, Silas greeted his employer with a respectful nod. Thomas Whitman was a barrel-chested man of 55, with a salt-and-pepper beard and shrewd eyes that missed little. "Morgan," he acknowledged, "how's your rescue patient?" "Recovering well, sir. Should be able to travel in a few days." Whitman dismounted with the fluid motion of a lifelong horseman. "Good to hear. We've had some strange visitors asking after a foreign woman. Europeans, by their accents, said their family looking for their cousin who wandered off during their tour of the West." Silas kept his expression neutral. "Is that so?" "Indeed. Offered a substantial reward for information." Whitman studied Silas carefully. "I told them I hadn't seen any foreign ladies around here. Was I mistaken?" For 15 years, Silas had given Thomas Whitman honest work and loyalty, but something in the stranger's story rang false, and he found himself unwilling to expose Elisabetta until he knew more. "Your daughter brought biscuits for my guest this morning," Silas said, sidestepping the question. "A woman who was caught in a cabin fire while traveling. She'll be moving on once she's healed." Whitman nodded slowly. "I see. Well, if these gentlemen return, they might want to speak with her themselves, to determine if she's their lost cousin." "Of course," Silas agreed, knowing it would never happen if he could help it. Something in Elisabetta's fear was genuine, and until he knew otherwise, he would honor the instinct that had led him into that burning cabin in the first place. As Whitman and his men rode away, Silas felt the weight of the choice he'd just made, placing a stranger's word above straightforward dealings with the man who'd given him a place in this world. He pulled out his journal again, sketching the horizon line while his thoughts settled. Whatever trouble the woman had brought to his door, he was now firmly in its path. Just like the smoke rising from that cabin 3 days ago, there was no mistaking the signs. A storm was coming. Evening settled over the ranch like a worn blanket, bringing with it the familiar chorus of cricket song and distant coyote calls. Silas returned from his day's work to find Elisabetta sitting on his porch, wearing one of his old shirts with her tattered skirt, her eyes fixed on the purpling horizon. "You shouldn't be outside," he said, dismounting and loosening his horse's cinch. "Those men Mr. Whitman mentioned could return." "I've spent too many days hiding in dark spaces," she replied, not looking at him. "Sometimes the risk of fresh air is worth taking." In the fading light, he noticed color had returned to her cheeks. The elegant woman was emerging from beneath the soot and exhaustion of their first encounter. It made her stranger somehow, more out of place among the rough-hewn reality of ranch life. "You rode the boundaries today," she observed, checking for intruders. Silas led his horse toward the small corral. "It's my job." "And looking for signs of whoever burned that cabin?" He paused. The thought had indeed occupied him throughout the day. The fire could have been an accident. It wasn't. Her voice carried absolute certainty. "Just as it was no accident that you found me there." Inside the cabin, Silas lit the oil lamp, while Elisabetta settled into what had become her chair. The golden light softened her features, reminding him of Renaissance paintings he'd once seen in a book, foreign and familiar all at once. "You promised me the full story," he reminded her, setting a pot of beans to warm on the stove. "And you promised to believe it." She studied her hands, one thumb tracing over the base of her ring finger, where a ring might have been. "I promised to listen," he corrected. Elisabetta smiled faintly. "A careful man. Good." From within the folds of her skirt, she produced a small object and placed it on the table between them. A ring bearing an intricate seal, some kind of bird clutching what appeared to be a branch of berries. "The royal seal of House Varennia," she explained. "Given to me by my father on my 16th birthday, and not something that would be carried by anyone other than immediate family." Silas examined it without touching. The craftsmanship was like nothing he'd seen before. The gold almost luminous in the lamplight, the details impossibly fine. "I was third in line," she continued. "My father, then my older brother Alaric, then me." It should have been a comfortable position, responsibility without the ultimate burden of rule. "I served as an ambassador, traveling between courts, building alliances." "What changed?" "My father died last winter. Not unexpected. He'd been ill for years. But then my mother followed within a month. Officially, it was grief." Her mouth tightened. "I believe it was poison." Outside, a dog barked in the distance. The beans began to simmer, filling the cabin with their humble aroma. "My brother was to be crowned next month. I returned from my post in Paris for the preparations, only to discover documents in his study, plans to sign over our country's mineral rights to foreign interests in exchange for personal wealth and protection." "And he knew you'd found them," Silas surmised. "He knew I suspected. The next night my lady's maid was found dead in my bed, stabbed with a knife bearing my insignia." Her voice remained steady, but her fingers trembled slightly. "I was to be framed for murder, then eliminated during my escape." "So you escaped for real?" "With help from the palace guard captain, an old friend. He smuggled me onto a merchant, a vessel bound for New York." She fingered the ring. "I had contacts in Washington who might have helped, but my brother's agents were close behind. I've been running westward for nearly 2 months." Silas spooned beans into 2 bowls and cut slices from a loaf of bread. Nothing like the fare a princess would be accustomed to, but sustenance nonetheless. "Why here?" he asked, pushing a bowl toward her. "The Montana Territory is about as far from European politics as one could get." "Precisely the reason. And I had heard there were settlements of European emigrants in the region. People who might understand my language, help me find passage back through less obvious channels." She accepted the food with murmured thanks. "The cabin belonged to a Swiss family. They were helping me when your neighbor's men found us." Mr. Whitman's men. Her eyes met his. 4 riders. They asked questions first, then returned with torches. "The family fled out the back. I stayed to destroy documents that might lead to others who've helped me." That's when the smoke overcame me. The implications settled over Silas like a cold fog. If Thomas Whitman's men had been involved, then his employer was either part of this conspiracy or being used by it. Neither possibility sat well. "You don't trust easily, Mr. Morgan," Elisabetta observed, watching his face. "That will serve us both well in the coming days." "Us?" he questioned, raising an eyebrow. Before she could respond, a knock at the door brought both of them to attention. Elisabetta immediately moved toward the back room while Silas reached for the rifle kept beside the door. "Morgan, you decent in." "There?" Sarah Whitman's voice came through the wooden door. Silas exhaled, setting the rifle aside. He opened the door to find Sarah holding a covered dish. Her expression caught between concern and curiosity. "I thought your guest might appreciate something more substantial than biscuits," she explained, trying to peek past him into the cabin. "That's thoughtful of you, Miss Whitman," Silas said, not moving from the doorway. "Won't you introduce us?" Sarah pressed. "Father mentioned you had a foreign lady staying with you. It must be terribly dull for her with only your company." Before Silas could deflect again, Elisabetta appeared at his shoulder. "Your concern is most appreciated," she said, her accent noticeably thicker than when she spoke with Silas alone. I am Elisa. Mr. Morgan has been most kind following my misfortune." Sarah's eyes widened slightly at Elisabetta's appearance. Even in borrowed clothes, there was no disguising her regal bearing. "I'm Sarah Whitman," she replied, extending the dish. "My father owns this ranch. If there's anything you need during your stay, you need only ask." "You are too generous," Elisabetta said, accepting the offering. "But I shall be continuing my journey soon. My family will be quite worried." "Your family?" Sarah inquired. "Where are you from, Miss Elisa? Your accent is lovely." "Austria," Elisabetta replied smoothly. "A small province near the Italian border. Nothing so grand as your Montana. Such space, such freedom." Silas noted the careful deception. Close enough to the truth to be convincing, yet vague enough to provide no real information. "Well," Sarah said after an awkward pause, "I hope you'll join us for dinner at the main house before you leave. Father would love to hear about Europe. He traveled there in his youth. Perhaps," Elisabetta smiled diplomatically, "if my recovery permits." After Sarah departed, visibly unsatisfied with the brief encounter, Silas closed the door firmly. "You shouldn't have shown yourself," he chided. "And you shouldn't underestimate the curiosity of a woman who sees you as her territory." Elisabetta countered. Better to satisfy her with a glimpse than leave her imagining conspiracies. "Speaking of conspiracies," Silas said, returning to the table where their meal was cooling, "if what you say about Mr. Whitman's men is true, this may be the least safe place for you." Elisabetta set down Sarah's dish, some kind of fruit cobbler, without opening it. "The men may have been using his name without his knowledge, or paying his hands for information. Not every betrayal goes all the way to the top." "You sound experienced in such matters. Court politics are rarely straightforward." She reclaimed her seat, staring into her bowl of beans. "Mr. Morgan, I won't pretend I'm not asking a great deal. You've already risked more than most would for a stranger." From outside came the sound of men returning from the evening roundup, their distant voices carrying across the yard as they headed for the bunkhouse. Normal sounds of ranch life continuing while something extraordinary unfolded within these walls. "What exactly are you asking?" Silas inquired, though he suspected he already knew. "Safe passage to San Francisco. With your help, I can contact loyalists who will arrange my return to Varennia before my brother's coronation." She met his gaze directly. "I can offer you payment once we reach the city. I don't want your money." "Then consider it a matter of justice. My brother has corrupted foreign agents on American soil. They've burned property and likely committed murder. That should concern any law-abiding citizen." Silas pushed back from the table. "I'm a ranch hand, Miss Elisabetta, not a lawman or a soldier." Something in his tone must have revealed more than he intended, because she tilted her head slightly, studying him with new interest. "Not any more, perhaps," she said softly, "but once." He turned away, unwilling to have that particular conversation. "Get some rest. We'll talk more in the morning." That night Silas slept in the barn loft as he had since Elisabetta's arrival. Sleep came fitfully, punctuated by dreams of smoke and fire and the weight of responsibility he'd thought left behind long ago. Before dawn, he woke to the sound of quiet movement below. Peering over the edge of the loft, he saw Elisabetta examining his saddle. Her movements were practiced, almost professional, not the fumbling of someone unfamiliar with horses. "Planning an early departure," he called softly. She didn't startle, merely looked up with calm resignation. "I've brought danger to your door. It seemed selfish to involve you further." Silas descended the ladder, hay dust filtering through the dim light. "You wouldn't get 5 miles alone. I managed thousands of miles before meeting you, and ended up unconscious in a burning building." He crossed to where his saddlebags hung, retrieving a small brass telescope, one of his few personal possessions. "Northwest ridge. Look carefully at the tree line." Elisabetta extended the telescope and peered through it toward the indicated direction. After a moment, her breath caught. "A watcher. Been there since yesterday afternoon. Probably reporting your movements to whoever's giving the orders." Silas took back the telescope. Running now would be playing into their hands. She lowered the telescope, her composure cracking slightly to reveal genuine fear beneath. "They won't stop coming. Not until they've silenced me permanently. Then we'd better make sure they don't succeed." Silas surprised himself with the conviction in his voice. "But we do this carefully. No running half-cocked into the wilderness." "We?" Elisabetta searched his face. "You've decided to help me?" Silas wasn't entirely sure when the decision had solidified, but somewhere between the burning cabin and this moment, his course had been set. "I'll help you reach San Francisco," he clarified. "What happens after that is your affair." Relief washed over her features, quickly replaced by determination. "Thank you. I won't forget this." "Don't thank me yet," he warned. "Getting off this ranch without being followed won't be easy. And if Mr. Whitman's involved, it'll be even harder." "When must we leave?" she asked, already mentally preparing. Not immediately. Too suspicious. Silas began mentally cataloging what they would need. "I'll spend today as normal, gathering supplies without drawing attention. Tonight, I'll speak with old Buck. If anyone knows what's really happening on this ranch, it's him. Can he be trusted?" "With my life," Silas answered without hesitation. "More importantly, he can create a diversion if needed." For the first time since her arrival, Elisabetta smiled genuinely. Not the diplomatic curve of lips she'd offered Sarah, but something that reached her eyes and transformed her face. "In my experience, Mr. Morgan, it's not the crown or title that makes a person noble," she said quietly. "It's moments precisely like this one." As morning light began to filter through the barn slats, casting golden lines across the straw-covered floor, Silas realized they had crossed a threshold. Whatever came next, there would be no returning to the simple life he'd built here. For a man who valued predictability, who had deliberately chosen the straightforward existence of a ranch hand after years of chaos, it should have terrified him. Instead, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years, the clarifying focus of purpose. Outside, the ranch was awakening. Another day of routine work awaited, but beneath it ran the current of something extraordinary. A princess, a conspiracy, and a decision that would lead him far from Montana's familiar horizons. Morning chores provided Silas with the perfect cover to prepare for their departure. No one questioned a ranch hand checking horses, gathering supplies, or inspecting equipment. To any observer, he was simply conducting his daily routine with characteristic thoroughness. Old Buck found him in the tack room around midday, ostensibly looking for a replacement bridle. "Your lady friend's causing quite a stir," the older man said, his voice low despite their isolation. "Sarah's been in her father's ear all morning, says there's something not right about her story." Silas concentrated on the saddle he was mending. "Miss Whitman has a vivid imagination." "Maybe so." Buck settled onto a wooden stool, his arthritic knee extended stiffly. "But those foreigners came back this morning. Spoke with Mr. Whitman for nearly an hour." Silas's hands stilled. "Did you hear what was said?" "Enough." Buck's weathered face revealed concern. "They're offering $500 for information about your guest. Claim she's mentally unsound. Ran away from her caretakers during treatment. Say she has delusions of grandeur. Think she's royalty." The last part made Silas's stomach tighten. Either these men knew exactly who Elisabetta was, or her story was indeed fabricated. Neither option simplified matters. "What did Mr. Whitman say?" Silas asked. "Told them he'd ask around. Directed them to the sheriff in town." Buck leaned closer. "But he sent one of them with Joey to check the line cabins. They're working their way around the property." Silas nodded, absorbing this information. "I need a favor, Buck." "Figured as much." The old cowboy didn't even hesitate. "What are we talking about?" "I need to get her to San Francisco without anyone following." Buck whistled low. "That's a considerable journey, and considerable risk if these men are what I suspect." "What do you suspect?" "Nothing good." Buck stood with a wince. "Those aren't gentlemen looking for a confused relative. They carry themselves like soldiers, or worse." Silas had noticed the same thing. "I gave her my word." Buck studied him for a long moment. "Must be quite a story she's told you." "It is." Silas hesitated, then added, "I believe her, Buck. That's good enough for me." Buck nodded decisively. "I'll create a distraction tonight. The north pasture. Fence needs repair. I'll suggest a team head out at first light. Should draw attention away from your departure. I'll make it up to you. See that you stay alive. That'll be payment enough." Buck turned to leave, then paused. "Does she really claim to be a princess or some such?" Silas allowed himself a small smile. "Queen, actually." Buck chuckled. "Always knew you were destined for bigger things than cow-punching." When Silas returned to his cabin that afternoon, he found Elisabetta pacing the small space like a caged wildcat. She'd fashioned her tattered skirt and his spare shirt into something more befitting her station, and had managed to arrange her dark hair in a style that wouldn't have looked out of place in an Eastern drawing room. "They're searching the property," she said without preamble. "I saw them from the window." "I know. We leave tonight." Silas began gathering essentials: coffee, jerky, hardtack. "Pack only what you absolutely need. We'll travel light." Instead of moving to comply, Elisabetta sank into a chair, a conflict evident in her expression. "Before we proceed, you deserve the complete truth," she said, her voice taking on a formal quality that highlighted the difference in their stations. "I've told you fragments, but not everything." "This seems an odd time for full disclosure," Silas remarked, continuing his preparations. "It's precisely the right time, before you risk everything on my behalf." From within her makeshift garments, she withdrew a folded piece of parchment. "This may help explain matters more clearly." Silas wiped his hands before accepting the document. Unfolding it revealed a map, clearly hand-drawn and detailed in a way that suggested intimate knowledge. The central feature was a small nation nestled between larger powers, with mountain ranges along one border and a coastline on another. Various regions were marked with symbols, crossed pickaxes, grape clusters, and what appeared to be manufacturing indicators. Varennia, Elisabetta explained, pointing to the central territory. 300 square miles of the most strategically valuable land in Europe, small enough to be overlooked in casual diplomacy, yet positioned at the crossroads of four major powers. Silas noted the borders with larger nations labelled in elegant script: Prussia, Austria, Hungary, Switzerland, and a narrow corridor to the Mediterranean. "These markings?" he asked, indicating the crossed pickaxes. "Silver mines, the finest in Europe. And here," her finger moved to a region marked with a unique crystal-like symbol, "deposits of a mineral called scheelite. Never heard of it. Few have, but it strengthens steel beyond any known alloy, essential for modern weaponry and railways." Her voice took on an edge. "My father protected these resources fiercely, understanding they guaranteed our independence, despite our size." Silas studied the map more carefully, noting the capital city positioned in a valley surrounded by 3 mountain passes. A defensible position, he recognized. The geography of a nation accustomed to threats. "Your brother intends to sell these resources," he surmised, recalling their earlier conversation. "Not just sell, surrender complete control." Elisabetta's finger traced to markings along the border with Prussia. "These are planned garrison positions, foreign troops on Varennian soil, ostensibly for protection." "Occupation disguised as alliance," Silas observed. His military background made the strategy transparent. "Precisely." She took back the map, folding it with reverent care. "My brother gains personal wealth and security, while our nation loses its sovereignty. Within a generation, Varennia would exist in name only." Silas resumed his packing. Why would he betray his own country this way? Fear, primarily. Alaric has always feared our larger neighbors, and greed, the personal fortune promised, would make him wealthy beyond imagination, even without a throne. Her expression darkened. "But there's more. The scheelite deposits were discovered only recently, during my father's final years. Their true value is known to very few outside our geological ministry, and your brother wants to control that knowledge, along with the Prussian industrialists who've been courting him for years." She sighed heavily. "My father's final instruction to me was to ensure these resources benefit our people, not foreign powers. It was the last promise I made to him." The gravity of her mission settled over the cabin. This wasn't merely about a royal succession or personal safety. It was about the fate of an entire nation, however small. "Mr. Morgan," Elisabetta continued, her voice softening, "I understand. If this changes your calculation, this is not your fight, nor your responsibility." Silas paused in his work, considering her words. He'd spent 15 years avoiding complications, building a life of straightforward labor and clear boundaries. Now he was contemplating involvement in European politics and royal intrigue, precisely the kind of chaos he'd left behind. "I gave my word," he said simply. "That hasn't changed." Relief crossed her features. "Thank you. But I need to know everything if we're to reach San Francisco safely. No more half-truths or omissions." He fixed her with a pointed look, "Including why these men seem to have American allies." Elisabetta rose and moved to the window, checking for watches before speaking again. "The mineral rights negotiations involve American investors as well, primarily in railroads and munitions. Your Mr. Whitman may not understand the full scope, but he's likely been promised exclusive contracts for cattle to feed workers at the mining operations. So he has financial incentive to help capture you," Silas concluded. "As would the local sheriff, the territorial governor, and anyone else these conspirators have approached." She turned back to face him. Money has a way of clouding judgment about distant political matters. A realization struck Silas. That's why you can't simply appeal to American authorities. Exactly. I don't know who's been compromised. The only people I can trust with certainty are the Varennian loyalists waiting in San Francisco. She hesitated, then added, and now you. The responsibility of that trust wasn't lost on Silas. He'd been trusted before, with men's lives and national secrets. In another lifetime, he'd tried to forget. That weight settled on his shoulders like a familiar burden, unwelcome, yet somehow fitting. There's something I should tell you as well, he said, opening a small trunk he kept locked beneath his bed. From it, he withdrew a folded document bearing an official seal. If we're sharing truths, Elisabetta accepted the paper with curiosity. As she unfolded it, her eyes widened slightly at the letterhead, United States War Department. You were a soldier, she said, scanning the contents. Cavalry, then special assignments during the late unpleasantness. His tone discouraged further questions about those assignments. Afterward, I worked for the government in various capacities, until I didn't. Understanding dawned in her expression. This explains your reluctance to involve yourself in political matters again. It explains why I know enough to be concerned. About helping you, he corrected, taking back the document and returning it to the trunk, but also why I might be useful beyond simply knowing the territory. A new respect entered her gaze. Then we are both more than we appear, Mr. Morgan. Silas, he said, if we're going to be traveling together, you might as well use my given name. Silas, she repeated, the informality clearly unfamiliar on her tongue. And you may call me Elisabetta, without the royal styling. The concession to equality, however small, felt significant coming from her. A bridge between their worlds, necessary for the journey ahead. Their preparations continued in companionable silence, each recalibrating their understanding of the other. Silas had known men of nobility during the war, had found most of them wanting when bullets flew and decisions mattered, yet something about Elisabetta suggested substance beneath the royal bearing. The risk she'd undertaken alone spoke to conviction beyond self-preservation. As dusk approached, Silas made a final trip to the barn, securing their provisions and checking that his chosen horses, his own chestnut mare and a steady gelding from the remuda, were ready for immediate departure. When he returned, Elisabetta had changed into riding clothes he'd procured from the ranch stores, men's attire that would allow her to ride astride rather than side saddle. Will this arrangement be acceptable? He asked, noting her skeptical examination of the clothing. I've endured worse for less worthy causes, she replied with pragmatic dignity, though I admit, it's been some years since I rode like a cavalry officer. You ride cavalry style? A ghost of a smile touched her lips. The Varennian Royal Guard accepts women. I trained with them from childhood, my father's insistence. A ruler should understand military matters firsthand. Silas reassessed her yet again. You continue to surprise, Your Majesty. I should hope. So, she replied, predictability is a luxury neither of us can afford at present. As night settled fully over the ranch, they finalized their preparations. Silas had arranged with old Buck to have horses saddled and waiting at the eastern property line, where the foreman rarely patrolled. They would travel by foot through the darkness to reach them, then ride hard for the southern hills before cutting west. Once we're clear of the ranch, Silas explained, checking his revolver before securing it in his holster, we'll avoid main trails and settlements. 3 days to the railroad at Helena, then west to San Francisco. And if we're pursued, we separate, he said firmly. You continue to the objective while I delay them. She frowned. I won't abandon you to face them alone. This isn't a negotiation. His tone left no room for argument. The mission is getting you to San Francisco. Everything else is secondary. Though clearly displeased, Elisabetta nodded her acceptance. Very well, but I expect you to exercise appropriate caution, not reckless heroics." "I haven't survived this long by being reckless," he assured her. As they prepared for final departure, a soft knock at the cabin door froze them both. Silas motioned Elisabetta into the back room while he approached the door cautiously, hand on his sidearm. "Who's there?" he called quietly. "It's Sarah," came the hushed reply. "Please, Silas, I need to speak with you urgently." With a warning glance toward the back room, Silas opened the door just enough to see Sarah's face, illuminated faintly by the starlight. Her expression was troubled, her normally confident demeanor replaced by genuine concern. "You shouldn't be here, Miss Whitman," he said, keeping his voice low. "Those men," she whispered urgently. "The foreigners. I overheard them speaking with father. They're not who they claim to be." Silas tensed. "What did you hear?" "They plan to take your guest tonight, by force if necessary." Her eyes searched his face. "Father doesn't know the full truth. They've convinced him she's valuable to some business arrangement. But I saw their weapons, Silas. These aren't businessmen." Before he could respond, a flicker of movement behind Sarah caught his attention, a shadow shifting against the deeper darkness near the main house. "Get inside," he commanded, pulling her through the doorway and closing it swiftly. "Now tell me exactly what you heard." Sarah's warning hung in the air as Elisabetta emerged from the back room, her royal composure firmly in place despite the danger. "Miss Whitman," she acknowledged with a slight nod, "your assistance is most appreciated." Sarah stared, clearly caught, between curiosity about the foreign woman and the urgency of their situation. "You really are someone important, aren't you? Important enough that certain parties would prefer me silenced," Elisabetta replied. "Your father has been misled about their intentions." Silas moved to the window, carefully peering through a gap in the curtains. "How many men did you see, Miss Whitman?" "4 with father, but there were others. I saw horses behind the barn." Sarah wrung her hands. "Father believes they're simply escorting her to relatives. He doesn't know that they intend to kill me," Elisabetta finished calmly. "Your father is being used in a game much larger than cattle futures." Silas spotted movement, figures taking positions around the cabin at approximately 20-yard intervals. Their movements were too precise for ordinary ranch hands or even lawmen. These were trained operatives. "We need to move. Now." He grabbed his rifle and the small pack of essentials. "Is there another way out of here?" Sarah nodded quickly. "The root cellar. It connects to an old tunnel that was used during Indian troubles years ago. Comes out near the East Creek." "Perfect." Silas turned to Elisabetta. "Change of plans. We go through the tunnel, then south instead of east." "The horses?" Elisabetta asked, already gathering her meager belongings. "We'll have to find others once we're clear." He looked to Sarah. "Can you create a distraction, something to draw their attention while we slip out?" A sly smile spread across Sarah's face. "Leave that to me. Father's prize stallion is particularly high-strung around strangers. One good startle, and he'll have the whole stable in an uproar." "Do it," Silas instructed. "Then return to the main house immediately. Don't put yourself at risk." As Sarah slipped out through the front door, Silas led Elisabetta to a small trapdoor hidden beneath a worn rug. The root cellar below was little, more than an earthen cavity reinforced with timber supports, musty with the scent of stored potatoes and preserves. "This way," he whispered, guiding her toward a narrow tunnel at the back. "Stay low and follow closely." They had crawled perhaps 20 yards when commotion erupted above. Horses whinnying, men shouting, the distinctive crash of something heavy falling. Sarah's distraction was proving effective. The tunnel, barely wide enough for Silas's shoulders, opened eventually into a dry creek bed sheltered by overhanging willows. The night air felt fresher after the close confines, but danger still surrounded them. In the distance, lanterns bobbed as men began spreading out to search the property. "We need to reach that tree line," Silas whispered, pointing to a dark ridge. "About half a mile away." Stay in the shadows and move only when I signal. Their progress was agonizingly slow, bursts of movement followed by long moments of stillness as search parties passed nearby. Twice they pressed themselves into shallow depressions as riders passed within yards of their position. As they neared the tree line, a shout went up from the direction of the cabin. Their absence had been discovered. "Run," Silas urged, abandoning stealth for speed. They sprinted the final distance, the sound of pursuit growing behind them. Just as they reached the shelter of the pines, a figure loomed suddenly from behind a boulder, the gleam of a blade catching the moonlight. Elisabetta reacted with startling speed, diving low while sweeping her leg in an arc that caught there. Attacker at the ankles. The man toppled with a surprised grunt. Before he could recover, Silas delivered a precise blow to the temple, rendering him unconscious. "Royal Guard training," Elisabetta explained, slightly breathless, as Silas stared in surprise. He quickly searched the fallen man, finding a distinctive dagger with an ornate hilt bearing an insignia, a spread eagle clutching a scepter. Varennian. "Royal Guard," Elisabetta identified, her expression darkening. "My brother has turned my own protectors against me." Silas pocketed the dagger. "We need to keep moving. More will be coming." They pushed deeper into the forest, the sounds of pursuit fading temporarily as the search parties regrouped. The night grew colder as they climbed higher into the foothills. Making for a pass Silas knew would be difficult to follow in darkness. "Your riding skills will be tested shortly," he warned, as they crested a ridge overlooking a small valley. Below, a homesteader's cabin sat dark and quiet, with a corral containing several horses. "We need those mounts." "Stealing from innocent settlers?" Elisabetta questioned. "Borrowing," Silas corrected. "I'll leave payment." The acquisition of the horses went smoothly, 2 sturdy mountain ponies accustomed to rough terrain. Silas left. Gold coins in a pouch nailed to the cabin door, enough to compensate the owner generously. As they rode away from the homestead, following game trails higher into the mountains, Elisabetta finally broke the tense silence. "That man's presence means Alaric's agents have explicit orders to eliminate me, not merely capture me." Her voice remained steady, despite the implication. "They wouldn't send royal guards otherwise." "All the more reason to stay ahead of them," Silas replied, scanning the darkness behind them. "We'll ride through the night, make for the old mining trails. Few know them, and they're too narrow for large pursuit parties." As the first light of dawn touched the eastern sky, they paused briefly at a vantage point. In the valley far below, they could see riders spreading out in search patterns, at least a dozen men combing the foothills methodically. "They're not giving up easily," Elisabetta observed. "Neither are we," Silas assured her, checking the foreign dagger he'd taken. Its quality and distinctive design might prove useful, both as a weapon and as evidence of the conspiracy reaching American soil. They made camp at midday in a sheltered ravine. The horses hobbled nearby and hidden beneath a natural rock overhang. Elisabetta slept fitfully while Silas kept watch, his mind churning with the enormity of what lay ahead. The decision to leave, the ranch, to abandon 15 years of security and routine, had been made in haste, but its implications stretched far beyond the immediate danger. There would be no returning to that life now. Thomas Whitman would view his departure as betrayal, regardless of the circumstances. When Elisabetta woke, she found Silas staring at a worn leather wallet containing papers he rarely examined. "Your military documents," she observed, settling beside him with the quiet grace that seemed as natural to her as breathing. Silas nodded. "Discharge papers. Honorable, though there was debate about that at the time." "May I ask what happened?" He hesitated, then handed her the folded papers. The letterhead bore the seal of the United States Army, the date marking it nearly 16 years old. "I was part of a specialized unit," he explained as she read. "After the war officially ended, we were tasked with operations that existed in gray areas, tracking Confederate holdouts, protecting Reconstruction officials, occasionally retrieving sensitive documents. Intelligence work, Elisabetta translated, familiar with such euphemisms. My final assignment involved a foreign diplomat suspected of funneling arms to southern insurgents. Silas's voice grew distant. My orders were to obtain evidence, nothing more. But when I found proof, I also discovered his involvement in something larger, European powers positioning themselves to exploit American instability. Elisabetta studied the discharge papers more carefully. These mention deviation from assigned objectives. I pursued the European connection against orders. My superiors were concerned only with domestic threats. His jaw tightened. They buried my findings, transferred the diplomat quietly, and ended my service. You were right to investigate, she said softly. Perhaps. But I learned a hard lesson about politics transcending borders. He reclaimed the papers, folding them carefully. Powerful interests don't recognize national boundaries, only opportunities. Is that why you chose this remote life? To escape such complexities? I chose simplicity, he corrected. Honest work with clear purpose, no hidden agendas or diplomatic doublespeak. Until I arrived. Elisabetta noted with a hint of regret. Until you arrived, he agreed, though without accusation. They fell silent, listening to the distant sound of water trickling over rocks. Their pursuers would not be far behind, men trained to track through difficult terrain just as Silas once was. We should reach Helena in 2 days if we maintain this pace, he said finally. From there, the transcontinental railroad can take us west. My presence puts you in considerable danger, Elisabetta said. More than you anticipated when offering assistance to a woman in a burning cabin. I understood the implications when I made my decision. Did you? She studied him intently. You're sacrificing the life you've built, possibly risking American diplomatic complications, all for a foreign queen you barely know. Silas met her gaze steadily. I'm helping someone stand against corruption and betrayal. The titles are incidental. A smile touched her lips, a refreshingly American perspective. As afternoon shadows lengthened, they prepared to continue their journey. Silas secured his few possessions, including the military papers that linked his past to their present circumstances. These documents, evidence of his former skills and the reason he'd abandoned that life, now served as reminder of why this mission resonated beyond mere heroics. Your brother's conspiracy has reached American soil, he said, as they mounted. That makes this my concern as a citizen, regardless of borders. A convenient justification, Elisabetta observed, though her tone suggested approval rather than skepticism. I find it helps to have clear reasons when riding into uncertainty, he replied dryly. They traveled through the evening, keeping to game trails and avoiding open spaces where they might be spotted. The terrain grew increasingly rugged, the air cooler as they climbed. Twice they detected signs of pursuit, disturbed gravel at a stream crossing, freshly broken branches, but maintained their lead through Silas's intimate knowledge of the landscape. As night fell again, they risked a small fire in a deep ravine, the flames carefully shielded to prevent detection from a distance. Over coffee and jerky, their conversation turned to practical matters. Once we reach Helena, we'll need different identities, Silas advised. They'll be watching the trains. I've managed several identities since leaving Europe, Elisabetta assured him. The trick is maintaining consistent details while changing only the essentials. And what role should I play in this deception? She considered briefly. My husband would provide the least questioning from authorities. A businessman, perhaps, traveling west for opportunities. Silas nodded, acknowledging the practicality despite the intimate presumption. I'll need a profession that explains my particular skills. Former military is too close to truth, she agreed. Perhaps a frontier marshal seeking quieter opportunities. It would explain both your bearing and our hasty travel. The ease with which she adapted to their circumstances, from Royal protocols to wilderness survival to crafting deceptions continued to impress him. This was not a sheltered aristocrat, but a woman trained for leadership in all its aspects. As they extinguished the fire and prepared for a few hours' rest, Silas realized his decision had crystallized, not in the moment of danger at the ranch, but here in the wilderness, watching Elisabetta meet each challenge with determination and intelligence. Whatever her title, she was someone worth following into the uncertainty ahead. Dawn broke with muted colors over the mountain ridge as they prepared to continue their journey. Silas studied a small brass compass, its face weathered with age, but still functional. The instrument had been a parting gift from old Buck, pressed into his hand during their final conversation before everything changed. "My father gave me this during the Mexican War," Buck had said, his gnarled fingers closing Silas's hand around the compass. "Saved my life more times than I can count, not just by pointing north, but by reminding me which way was home when things got murky." The old cowboy had known more than he revealed, as always. Something in his eyes suggested he understood exactly what Silas was getting himself into, and approved nonetheless. "Got a letter waiting for Mr. Whitman," Buck had added with a wink. "Won't find it till morning. Explains you took leave for personal business. Should buy you some time before anyone realizes you've gone for good. Now, miles from the ranch and any semblance of his former life, Silas traced the compass's worn edges before checking their bearing. "We should reach the Henderson Pass by nightfall," he told Elisabetta, who was expertly adjusting her mount's saddle. "There's an old trapper's cabin where we can rest safely." She nodded, her movements efficient despite obvious fatigue. 2 days of hard riding had left its mark on them both, though she never complained. "Your friend's compass," she observed. "You value it greatly." "Old Buck sees things others miss," Silas replied. "He knew I'd need more than geographical guidance." On this journey, they rode through morning mist that clung to the pines, creating ghostly shapes along the mountainside. The borrowed horses had proven sure-footed on the treacherous trails, though less comfortable than Silas's beloved mare. "You speak little of your plans once we reach San Francisco," Silas noted as they crossed a small stream. "What exactly will your loyalists provide?" "Transportation to Varennia, documentation of my brother's conspiracy, and enough loyal guards to ensure I reach the capital safely." She guided her horse alongside his. "The coronation is still 3 weeks away. If I can return before then, present evidence to the Council of Ministers, Alaric's plans can be thwarted. And if we're delayed—" Her expression hardened. "Once crowned, removing him becomes significantly more difficult. Our laws protect the monarch except in cases of high treason, which requires overwhelming evidence and unanimous council approval." "Your brother seems to have considered every contingency," Silas observed. "Not everyone." A determined smile crossed her features. "He never anticipated I would find allies beyond his reach." By midday, they'd climbed high enough to see Helena. In the distant valley, a growing settlement clustered around the railroad that had brought civilization to the territory. Smoke from smelters and locomotives created a hazy ceiling over the buildings. "We'll approach after dark," Silas decided. "Less chance of being recognized." Elisabetta studied the town thoughtfully. "Will your military contacts still be viable? After 15 years, some," he acknowledged, "if they haven't moved on or died. There's a telegraph operator who served in my unit, Joshua Daniels. If he's still there, he can help secure train tickets without questions." They sheltered through the afternoon in a rocky overhang, sharing dried beef and the last of their coffee. The intimacy of their circumstances, 2 people alone against powerful forces, had created a familiarity that transcended their different backgrounds. "Tell me about Varennia," Silas requested as they waited for dusk. "Not the political situation, but the place itself." Elisabetta's expression softened. "Imagine valleys so green they hurt your eyes in spring, Villages where every house has window boxes spilling over with red geraniums. Lakes so clear you can count pebbles 30 feet down. Her voice took on a melodic quality. Our capital, Varenhof, sits within a mountain cradle. White stone buildings with red-tiled roofs, cathedral spires that catch the sunrise. Sounds peaceful, Silas remarked. It has been for generations. Sadness tinged her words. My family has ruled for 300 years, through wars that ravaged our neighbors, while leaving us relatively untouched. Our neutrality has been our salvation, until now. As twilight approached, they checked their meager supplies and prepared for the descent into Helena. Silas consulted Buck's compass once more, noting with irony that their path now led them away from the mountain simplicity toward the complications of civilization. "Keep this with you," he said, pressing the compass into Elisabetta's hand. "If we're separated, head northwest until you reach the railroad, then west to San Francisco." She recognized the significance of the gesture. "I'll guard it well. It's more than metal and magnetism," he told her. Old Buck would say it points to what matters, not just to North. "And what matters to you, Silas Morgan?" she asked quietly. He mounted his horse before answering. "Keeping my word, seeing justice done." Then, after a pause, "Getting you home safely." The simple truth hung between them as they began their descent toward Helena, and whatever awaited them there. Helena's outskirts welcomed them with the mingled sense of wood smoke, livestock, and humanity. They left their horses at a small livery stable on the edge of town, where Silas knew the owner wouldn't ask unnecessary questions. The man accepted payment with a nod, eyes briefly lingering on Elisabetta's unusual posture and bearing before returning to his work. "Even in men's clothing, you carry yourself like royalty," Silas murmured as they walked away. "Try to slouch a little." Elisabetta made a visible effort to relax her shoulders and adopt a less formal gait. "Years of governesses rapping my knuckles whenever I slouched. Hard habits to break." They found lodging in a modest boarding house run by a widow who accepted their story of being a married couple traveling west without comment. The single room was spare but clean, with a narrow bed, washstand, and small table with 2 mismatched chairs. "I'll take the floor," Silas said automatically. "Nonsense, we'll share the bed." At his raised eyebrow, she added, "We're both adults, and you need proper rest as much as I do. Besides, we're supposedly married." The practicality of her suggestion overrode any awkwardness. Their survival depended on being alert and capable, not handicapped by needless propriety. While Elisabetta freshened up with the basin of water provided, Silas ventured out to locate his old comrade at the telegraph office. The town had grown significantly since his last visit years ago. The muddy main street, now partially boarded over, with gas lamps illuminating storefronts that offered everything from mining supplies to French perfumes. Joshua Daniels proved easy to find, still operating the telegraph office as Silas had hoped. The reunion was brief but warm, their shared military past creating immediate trust. "Need 2 tickets on tomorrow's westbound," Silas explained after they'd exchanged pleasantries. "Under the name Collins, no paper trail." Joshua studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Running from something or toward something?" "Bit of both." "Dangerous?" "Could be." The sparse exchange satisfied both men. Joshua jotted something on a slip of paper. "Conductor's an old cavalryman. Show him this. He'll see you get a private compartment. No questions asked." When Silas returned to the boarding house, he found Elisabetta sitting at the small table, drinking from a simple clay cup. The crude vessel looked strange in her elegant hands, like a peasant tool held by a Renaissance painting subject. "The landlady brought tea," she explained, gesturing to a second cup. "Not exactly Varennian blend, but remarkably restorative." Silas accepted the offering, noting how she had transformed their sparse accommodations with small touches, a wildflower in a water glass, her borrowed clothes neatly folded, the bed linen straightened with military precision. We have tickets for tomorrow's train, he informed her. A private compartment will provide some security. Excellent. She sipped from the clay cup thoughtfully. I've been considering our approach once we reach San Francisco. My contact there is a former Minister of Commerce who fled when Alaric began consolidating power. He's established an import business as cover for Varennian loyalists. Can he be trusted completely? As much as anyone can be in these circumstances. She traced the rim of the cup with one finger. Count Vasily was my father's closest advisor for 30 years. His loyalty has been tested repeatedly. Their conversation paused as footsteps passed their door, both instinctively tensing until the sound faded down the hallway. You've spent your life trusting the right people, Silas observed. Must be difficult now, not knowing who remains loyal. Perhaps the greatest challenge of leadership, she agreed. Determining who serves the crown versus who serves themselves. A wry smile touched her lips. You at least have made your motivations refreshingly clear. Have I? Justice, honor, perhaps a touch of adventure after years of routine. Her assessment was gentle but perceptive. And a fundamental decency that wouldn't allow you to abandon someone in need, regardless of their station. Silas found himself uncomfortable. With her analysis, accurate though it might be, he changed the subject. We should review our route options from San Francisco to Varennia. As they discussed ocean passages and European ports, Elisabetta continued to cradle the simple clay cup in her hands, treating the crude vessel with the same care she might to circumstances, he noted during a lull in their planning. Survival requires flexibility, she replied. Besides, there's honesty in simple things. She held up the cup. No pretense, no artifice, just purpose fulfilled without decoration. Most royalty I've encountered preferred decoration, Silas remarked. Perhaps that's why they remain enthroned while I flee across continents. Her tone was light, but carried an undercurrent of genuine reflection. My father taught me that a ruler who cannot live as her people live cannot truly understand their needs. As darkness settled over the frontier town, they completed their preparations for the next day's departure. The train would take them west, deeper into their shared journey and whatever dangers awaited. But in this small room, with simple accommodations and honest conversation, they had found a momentary sanctuary and a deepening trust that would serve them in the trials to come. The journey to Denver passed with relative calm, their private compartment providing both security and necessary rest. Silas and Elisabetta settled into the roles of Mr. and Mrs. Collins, a frontier marshal and his wife heading west for new opportunities. The fiction proved effective. Other passengers nodded politely but asked few questions, respecting the reserved demeanor that Silas had cultivated over years of solitude. Denver's station bustled with activity as they disembarked, the city's growth evident in the crowds and construction visible in every direction. They needed to transfer here for the transcontinental line that would carry them to San Francisco. 6-hour layover, Silas noted, checking the posted schedules. We should secure tickets and find somewhere inconspicuous to wait. As they moved through the station, Elisabetta suddenly gripped his arm, her posture stiffening. The bulletin board, she murmured, eyes fixed ahead. Silas followed her gaze to a wall covered with notices, advertisements, and wanted posters. Among them, freshly posted and prominent, was a drawing of his own face above the words "Wanted, Kidnapping and Theft," with a substantial reward listed below. Impressive efficiency, Elisabetta said quietly. They've managed to alert authorities across multiple territories in just days. Silas guided her toward a less crowded area, his mind calculating options. This complicates matters. We can't take the main line now. They'll be watching all westbound trains. And we can't remain in Denver, she added. A frontier marshal would be recognized by local law enforcement. They found temporary refuge in a small Chinese laundry several blocks from the station. The elderly proprietor, Mr. Lee, accepted a generous payment to let them use his back room, while Silas gathered information. "My grandfather came for gold," Mr. Lee explained as he served them tea. "Found laundry more reliable. Americans always need clean shirts, even in bad times." While Elisabetta remained hidden, Silas ventured out to assess their situation. He returned an hour later, his expression grim. "They're watching the station and hotels," he reported, unfolding a paper he'd torn from a wall. "These posters are everywhere." The wanted poster described Silas Morgan as a dangerous former soldier who had kidnapped a European noblewoman suffering from delusions. It warned that he was armed and desperate, likely heading west to escape justice. "They've crafted a convincing narrative," Elisabetta observed. "Anyone seeing us together would naturally assume I'm your captive, not your ally." "It's a clever trap," Silas agreed. "If I travel alone, I'm suspicious. If we travel together, the story seems confirmed." Mr. Lee, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. "My nephew drives supply wagon to mining camps south of here, leaves tomorrow morning. No questions about passengers who pay well." The offer presented their best option, abandoning the railroads for less monitored routes, despite the additional time it would add to their journey. "The southern route would take us through New Mexico territory," Silas considered. "Longer, but we could connect with the Southern Pacific line, where they're less likely to be watching for us." "How much longer?" Elisabetta asked, the urgency of her mission evident in her voice. 4, maybe 5 days, assuming no further complications." She nodded, accepting the reality of their situation. "Then we adapt, again." That evening, they remained in the small room behind the laundry, the rhythmic sounds of Mr. Lee's iron providing an oddly soothing backdrop to their planning. The wanted poster lay on the table between them, a stark reminder of the forces aligned against them. "Your Western skills have served us well in the wilderness," Elisabetta noted, "but here in the city they've made you conspicuous. I fear it's my turn to navigate unfamiliar territory." "You have experience with urban evasion?" Silas asked, surprised. A small smile touched her lips. "Royal diplomatic training includes more practical skills than you might imagine. Tomorrow, I'll need different clothing and an opportunity to acquire certain supplies." Mr. Lee proved invaluable, not only providing them shelter, but connecting them with his extended family network. His niece arrived with women's clothing suitable for a respectable traveler, while his son brought intelligence about police movements in the city. "They search hotels again tonight," the young man reported. "2 men with foreign accents ask many questions at station. Before dawn, they prepared to leave with Mr. Lee's nephew." Elisabetta had transformed herself yet again, now appearing as a modest, middle-class wife with none of the royal bearing that had previously marked her as unusual. She had pinned her hair differently, adjusted her posture, even altered her speech patterns to sound more Western. "You're quite the actress," Silas remarked, as they loaded their few possessions onto the supply wagon. "When your life depends on others' perceptions, you learn to control the performance," she replied. Then, with a glance at the wanted poster she'd kept as a reminder, "They've underestimated us both, portraying you as a brute and me as helpless. Their arrogance will be their undoing." As the wagon rumbled away from Denver in the gray pre-dawn light, they left behind the trap that had been set for them. Ahead lay an arduous journey through challenging terrain, but they departed with one certainty. Their pursuers would not expect this change in direction, buying them precious time. To reach the coast, the New Mexico territory stretched before them like a painter's vision of desolation. Ochre and sienna landscapes, broken only by the occasional twisted juniper or defiant saguaro. 3 days had passed since they'd left the relative comfort of Denver, each mile drawing them deeper into a wilderness far different from Montana's verdant mountains. "Water check," Silas called, halting their mules in the sparse shade of a rock formation. The supply wagon had taken them as far as a remote mining settlement, where they'd traded for 2 trail-worn mules and bare necessities. Elisabetta handed him their primary canteen, its weight ominously light as he shook it. Perhaps 2 cups remained of their 4-day supply, with at least another day's travel before they'd reach the next reliable water source. "We'll need to ration more strictly," he announced, returning the canteen. "Half cup each at dawn and dusk." Only she nodded, accepting the reality without complaint. Her fair complexion had suffered in the harsh desert sun despite improvised protection, her lips cracked from constant wind and dryness. Yet she maintained the same determination that had carried her across continents. "The Southern Pacific Station can't be more than 40 miles southwest," Silas estimated, consulting Buck's compass and his mental map of the territory. "If we push through the night while it's cooler, we might reach it tomorrow evening." "The mules won't last at this pace," Elisabetta observed, stroking the neck of her mount. The animals were already showing signs of distress, their normally sturdy constitutions challenged by the harsh conditions. As they continued, the afternoon heat intensified, creating wavering mirages on the horizon that teased with visions of water and shade. Conversation dwindled to essential communication, every ounce of energy conserved for the journey itself. By evening, Elisabetta's condition had deteriorated. Her normally alert posture had given way to a worrying slump, her responses becoming delayed and confused. Silas recognized the signs of heat exhaustion immediately. "We stop here," he decided, helping her dismount beside a sheltered arroyo. "The sun's damage doesn't always show until hours later." She tried to protest, but swayed on her feet, confirming his assessment. He eased her into the deepest shade, using their bedroll to create a protective barrier against the still hot ground. "Drink," he urged, offering the precious canteen. Small sips. Elisabetta managed a few swallows before a racking cough overtook her. Silas felt her forehead hot and dry, a dangerous sign that her body had stopped cooling itself properly. "I've faced parliamentary debates more punishing than this," she attempted to joke, though her voice emerged as a rasp. "Save your strength," he advised, using their spare shirt dampened with the last drops from his personal canteen to cool her face and neck. As night fell, bringing only modest relief from the heat, Elisabetta's condition worsened. Fever took hold, sending her into periods of restless delirium, interspersed with unsettling lucidity. "My father would be disappointed," she murmured during one clear moment, staring at the star-filled sky. "A proper queen prevails against all environments." "Your father would be proud of your determination," Silas countered, adjusting the damp cloth on her forehead. "Rest now." Later, as her fever peaked, her murmurings shifted to her native language, vulnerable confessions not meant for his ears. He caught fragments about childhood fears, burdens of responsibility, and doubts about her worthiness to rule that she'd never expressed while fully conscious. "I never wanted the crown," she whispered in English, clutching his hand with surprising strength, "only to protect what my ancestors built." By dawn, the fever had broken, though it left her dangerously weakened. Silas surveyed their situation with growing concern. The main canteen held barely half a cup of water. The terrain ahead offered no obvious sources, and Elisabetta needed more recovery time than they could afford. "There's an abandoned mining claim marked on the map," he told her, pointing to a ridge about 5 miles distant. "Might have a well, or at least shelter from the midday heat." The journey to the mining claim tested them both. Silas walked, leading both mules to reduce their burden, while Elisabetta focused on simply remaining upright in the saddle. Neither spoke, conserving moisture and energy with the discipline of those who understand survival's narrow margins. They reached the claim by mid-morning, a tumble-down shack beside a collapsed mine entrance, long abandoned, but still offering precious shade. To Silas's immense relief, he located a covered well that, while brackish, contained water that could be boiled safe. "We'll rest here today and tonight," he decided, helping Elisabetta into the relative cool of the shack. Regain strength before the final push. She didn't protest, a measure of her condition. As he prepared a small fire to boil water, she examined their nearly empty canteen with a contemplative expression. "It's remarkable how priorities clarify when resources dwindle," she observed. "In Varennia, water flows from silver fountains. In the palace courtyards, endless, thoughtless abundance. Desert has a way of teaching appreciation." Silas agreed, carefully filling the canteen with fresh boiled water. "If I return to my throne," she said softly, "I shall never again view such basics as common. When," he corrected, "when you return." A weak smile touched her cracked lips. "Your confidence is either admirable or delusional in our current state. We've faced worse odds," he reminded her, "and we're still moving forward." That evening, as a rare desert thunderstorm unleashed itself around their shelter, they listened to rain drumming on the tin roof, a symphony of renewal and possibility. The canteen, now full again, sat between them like a trophy of perseverance. "Tomorrow," Elisabetta said with returning strength, "we reach the southern Pacific, and then San Francisco." San Francisco sprawled before them in a riot of colors and sounds, a stark contrast to the desert solitude they'd endured. The southern Pacific had delivered them to a world of foghorns, clattering cable cars, and a babel of languages from every corner of the globe. After weeks of pursuit and hardship, they had reached their destination, though safety remained elusive. "It's overwhelming," Elisabetta admitted as they navigated the bustling waterfront, her eyes darting from Chinese fishmongers to Italian grocers to sailors of every nationality. "I visited Paris, London, Vienna, but this has a different energy." "Entirely. The edge of the continent," Silas explained, guiding her through the crowd with a protective hand at her elbow. "Everyone here is either running from something or chasing something. "And we're doing both," she observed wryly. They found lodging in a modest hotel near the Embarcadero, using the last of the funds they'd conserved through their journey. Their room overlooked the harbour, where ships from a dozen nations bobbed at anchor, awaiting cargo or passengers. "Count Vasili's import office is near Portsmouth Square," Elisabetta said, studying a city map they'd acquired. "We should make contact immediately." Silas frowned, studying the harbour through their window. "Something feels wrong. We've encountered no pursuit since the desert crossing, after the efforts they made in Denver." "Perhaps they believe we perished in the desert," she suggested, though her tone indicated she didn't believe it herself. "Or they're waiting for us to lead them to your loyalists." He turned from the window. "We need to approach carefully." The Count's office was housed in a respectable brick building with Varennian imports, etched on a brass plaque beside the door. Silas surveyed the street for several minutes before allowing Elisabetta to approach, noting two men who seemed too interested in the morning newspaper they shared. "Potential watchers at the corner," he murmured. "Enter alone. I'll follow if all seems well." Inside, Elisabetta was greeted by a clerk who showed no recognition at her appearance. She provided the coded greeting she'd memorized years earlier as part of diplomatic protocols. "I seek Varennian crystal for a special occasion. The kind that catches sunlight with particular fire." The clerk's expression shifted subtly. "We have just received a shipment that might suit. Please follow me." She was led to a private office, where an elegant man in his 60s rose from behind a desk. Count Vasily bore the refined features of European nobility, though his clothing reflected practical American business sensibilities. "Your Majesty," he whispered, bowing deeply, "we had begun to fear the worst." "The journey proved challenging," she acknowledged. "I have a companion outside who made it possible. He should join us." Within minutes, Silas was brought inside, the lines drawn against potential observation. The Count assessed him with the shrewd gaze of a lifelong diplomat. "America continues to produce remarkable men," he observed. "You have our eternal gratitude, Mr. Morgan." "Save your thanks until we've completed the mission," Silas replied pragmatically. The Count nodded approvingly before turning to business. The Varennian vessel Aurora is docked and prepared for immediate departure. However, recent diplomatic communications suggest your brother's agents have alerted port authorities to watch for you both. From a concealed safe, he withdrew a leather portfolio containing several official-looking documents. These should resolve that particular obstacle. Elisabetta examined the forged travel papers with admiration for their craftsmanship. Norwegian diplomatic passports. Norway maintains excellent relations with both America and the powers surrounding Varennia, the Count explained. Their diplomatic missions are respected, but infrequent enough that few officials would recognize inconsistencies. Silas studied his own passport, complete with photograph and biographical details that paralleled his actual history while changing crucial identifiers. Carl Magnusson, agricultural attaché, he read aloud, and Her Majesty becomes Ingrid Magnusson, Cultural Affairs Secretary, the Count added. The documentation includes diplomatic pouch certification, which should prevent customs examination of your luggage. When can we depart? Elisabetta asked, her focus entirely on the mission's completion. Tonight's evening tide. The Aurora will sail under commercial registry, but is staffed entirely by loyalists. The Count hesitated before adding, there is, however, a complication. We've received intelligence that 2 of your brother's agents arrived in San Francisco 3 days ago. They've been observed watching the docks. Silas exchanged a glance with Elisabetta. They anticipated our destination. Inevitably, she agreed. The question is whether they know about the Aurora specifically. We must assume they're monitoring. All Varennian vessels, the Count said gravely. A diversion may be necessary to ensure your safe boarding. As they finalized arrangements, Silas found himself studying the forged travel documents that would carry them across the ocean. These papers represented their final transformation. From ranch hand and princess to diplomatic envoys, from fugitives to official representatives. The quality of the forgeries was remarkable, yet they remained fundamentally false, a deception necessary to serve a greater truth. You seem troubled, Elisabetta noted, as they prepared to return to their hotel to gather their few possessions. Just considering the layers of identity we've adopted since that burning cabin, he replied. I wonder if we risk losing ourselves. Beneath them, she touched the passport bearing her false name and photograph. The document is counterfeit. The mission remains authentic. Her eyes met his with unwavering certainty. As do we. As they stepped back onto San Francisco's teeming streets, the Aurora waited in the harbor beyond, their passage to Europe and the culmination of their unlikely alliance. The forged documents secured in an inner pocket felt like both protection and vulnerability, a fragile shield against the forces still determined to stop them. The Aurora slipped from San Francisco's harbor under cover of fog and darkness, their boarding having gone more smoothly than expected. Count Vasili's diversion, a fabricated diplomatic reception that drew attention away from the docks, had proved effective. Now 3 days into their Pacific crossing, the rhythms of shipboard life had established themselves. Their cabin was modest but private, befitting the mid-level diplomats they purported to be. The vessel itself carried legitimate cargo alongside, its royal passenger maintaining the appearance of an ordinary merchant ship while secretly staffed by Varennian loyalists. Silas stood at the rail, watching sunlight dance across the endless blue. The ocean's vastness offered a strange comfort after weeks of feeling pursued across every mile of terrain. Out here, there were no trails to follow, no telegrams to send ahead, no wanted posters to distribute. The captain says we're making excellent time, Elisabetta remarked, joining him at the rail. The winds favor us. In the days since boarding, she had gradually reclaimed elements of her royal bearing, subtle changes in posture and speech that emerged naturally as immediate danger receded. Yet something of the frontier remained in her demeanor, a newfound directness that complemented her natural dignity. Still seasick? Silas inquired. Her first day aboard had been spent largely in their cabin, overcome by the vessel's motion. Improving, she replied with a rueful smile. Embarrassing for someone whose country maintains a proud naval tradition. My ancestors would be mortified. Their conversation paused as a crewman passed, nodding respectfully to the passengers he believed to be Norwegian diplomats. When they were alone again, Elisabetta produced a small object from her pocket, a deck of playing cards, worn around the edges, but still serviceable. The second mate provided these, she explained. I thought they might help pass the evenings. That night, seated at the small table in their cabin, Elisabetta shuffled the cards with surprising dexterity. What games do you know, Mr. Morgan? Standard. Frontier fare, he replied. Poker, blackjack, nothing fancy? Then perhaps I might teach you something new. Her hands moved fluidly, dealing an unfamiliar pattern. This is 20 abheben, a Varennian court game. Similar to your poker in some ways, but with additional complexities. The game proved challenging, involving multiple levels of strategy and psychological elements that Silas hadn't encountered in saloon card games. Elisabetta explained each move patiently, occasionally slipping into reminiscences about learning the game from her father. He used it to teach diplomacy, she recalled, arranging her cards thoughtfully. Each hand represents a negotiation, knowing when to reveal information, when to conceal your position, when to bluff, and when honesty serves best. Sounds like more than a game, Silas observed, studying his cards. Most things at court are. She placed a card decisively. Your move. As Silas considered his options, a heavy lurch of the ship sent several cards sliding across the table. Outside, the steady rhythm of waves against the hull had changed, becoming more insistent. Weather's turning, he noted. By morning, their smooth passage had transformed into a pitched battle against a Pacific storm. Rain lashed the decks, while massive swells lifted and dropped the Aurora with sickening regularity. Most passengers remained in their cabins, but Silas found Elisabetta on the covered portion of the deck, watching the crew work with evident admiration. The captain offered to explain their procedures, she said as he joined her. I believe he's impressed I haven't retreated to our cabin. Royal resilience, Silas commented, steadying himself against the ship's motion. Or simple stubbornness. She smiled briefly before growing serious. The storm has altered our course. We're sailing further north before turning toward Asia. Will it delay our arrival significantly? Perhaps 3 days. Still well before the coronation date. Her expression clouded. Though it shortens our margin considerably. That evening, confined to their cabin as the storm reached its peak, they returned to the card game, a small point of normalcy amid chaos. The worn deck had become a bridge between their worlds, a vehicle for her to share aspects of Varennian culture and for him to demonstrate the straightforward strategies he'd developed in frontier saloons. In your game, Elisabetta observed as they played by lantern light, the ship creaking around them. The highest value is in the royal cards, kings, queens. And in yours? Silas asked, noting how her version assigned different values. The scholar outranks the king in final play, she explained, revealing her winning hand. My ancestors believed wisdom should ultimately prevail over power. Enlightened. A view for a monarchy, he remarked. Varennia has always balanced tradition with progress, she said, gathering the cards. It's why we've survived while larger nations crumbled, and why I cannot allow my brother's coup to succeed. It betrays centuries of careful governance. As she shuffled the deck for another round, a particularly violent wave struck the ship. Lanterns swayed dangerously, and the cards scattered across the floor. Both dropped to their knees to retrieve them, their hands occasionally brushing in. The confined space. I never properly thanked you, Elisabetta said suddenly, looking up from the fallen cards. Not just for the rescue, but for believing me when others wouldn't, for risking everything on behalf of a country you've never seen. I've seen enough of its queen to judge its worth, Silas replied simply. Something shifted in her expression, a momentary vulnerability beneath the royal composure. And what judgment have you reached, Silas Morgan? The ship lurched again before he could answer, sending them both against the cabin wall, suddenly close in the dim light. For a breath, the roles and titles between them seemed to dissolve, leaving just two people bound by shared purpose and growing affection. The moment passed as quickly as it had come. They resumed collecting the scattered cards in companionable silence, the storm raging beyond their small sanctuary, carrying them inexorably toward whatever awaited in Varennia. London greeted them with its characteristic grey skies and ordered chaos, a city of stark contrast between imperial grandeur and industrial grit. After weeks at sea, solid ground felt strange beneath their feet as they navigated cobblestone. Streets still slick from morning rain. Different world entirely, Silas observed, his frontier-trained senses overwhelmed by the press of humanity and the layered sense of coal smoke, River Thames, and humanity packed too densely together. Indeed, Elisabetta agreed, though for her this European order represented a homecoming of sorts. However foreign London appears, it follows rules you can learn. There's structure beneath the chaos. They had maintained their Norwegian diplomatic identities through customs, the forged documents proving their worth one final time. Now they made their way toward Belgrave Square, where Count Vasily had arranged meeting with Varennian loyalists operating from the shadows of London society. Newsboys' cry pierced the general din. Continental crisis brewing. Succession disputes threaten stability. Read all about it. Elisabetta paused, purchasing a copy of the Times with coins Count Vasily had provided. The front page featured a detailed article on European political tensions, with particular focus on the upcoming Varennian coronation. Sources close to the Varennian court suggest Prince Regent Alaric has secured unprecedented foreign investment agreements to be formalized following his coronation next week. She read aloud as they continued walking. Representatives from Prussian industrial concerns have already arrived in Varenhof for the ceremonies. Silas studied her reaction. He's moving faster than anticipated. He believes I'm dead or neutralized, she replied, folding the newspaper carefully, which provides our only remaining advantage, surprise. The Loyalist safehouse proved to be an elegant townhome maintained by a Varennian duchess who had married into minor British nobility. Lady Marcella greeted them with restrained emotion, clasping Elisabetta's hands in her own. "Your Majesty," she whispered. "We had almost lost hope." Inside, they found a small but dedicated group, former ministers, military officers, and aristocrats, who had recognized Alaric's betrayal and chosen exile over complicity. Maps and documents covered tables in what had once been a formal dining room, transformed now into a center of resistance operations. "The situation has deteriorated," reported General Keller, a white-haired veteran who had commanded the Royal Guard for decades before Alaric forced his retirement. "Alaric has replaced most senior officials with loyalists. The Royal Guard stands divided, some suspicious but bound by oath, others actively complicit." "And the Council of Ministers?" Elisabetta inquired, examining the detailed maps of Varenhof. "Paralyzed. Without proof of his treachery, they cannot oppose the rightful heir." The general gestured to the newspaper she still carried. "Meanwhile, Prussian and Austrian agents operate openly in the capital, finalizing agreements that will effectively end our sovereignty." Silas studied the military deployments marked on the maps. "These positions, they're preparing for potential resistance." General Keller assessed Silas with newfound interest. "You have a tactical eye, Mr. Morgan." "Mr. Morgan's military background has proven invaluable throughout our journey," Elisabetta explained. "He should be included in all strategic discussions." The statement delivered with calm authority, silenced any potential objections from the traditional-minded loyalists. Silas noted how completely she had reclaimed her royal persona. The woman who had adapted to desert hardships and frontier conditions now seamlessly embodied her birthright once more. As detailed plans formed for their final approach to Varennia, Silas found himself increasingly peripheral to the discussions. European protocols, diplomatic channels, and court procedures dominated the conversation, a world where his frontier skills and American directness held less relevance. During a brief recess, he stepped outside to the small garden behind the townhouse, seeking momentary escape from the suffocating formality that had descended upon their operation. The newspaper lay on a stone bench, its headlines a stark reminder of the stakes involved. Elisabetta found him there, having slipped away from her advisors. For a moment, they stood in silence, London's distant sounds providing counterpoint to their thoughts. "They're good people," she said finally, "loyal and dedicated, and thoroughly European," Silas observed without rancor. "I feel about as useful as a hunting rifle at a garden party." A smile touched her lips. "You underestimate how valuable plain speaking and clear thinking become in rooms clouded by centuries of protocol." She picked up the newspaper, studying the headlines again. "Besides, you've seen my brother's operations firsthand on American soil. Your testimony carries weight none of them can provide." "Is that all I am now? A witness?" The question emerged more sharply than he'd intended. Elisabetta studied him carefully. "Is that what troubles you? That your role diminishes as we approach Varennia?" "I'm a practical man," he replied, choosing his words with care. "I understand when my usefulness ends." "Then you understand less than I credited." Her voice softened. "The path ahead requires both European subtlety and American forthrightness. Court intrigue and frontier justice." Before he could respond, Lady Marcella appeared at the garden door. "Your Majesty, the Austrian ambassador's former attaché has arrived with intelligence." Elisabetta nodded acknowledgement before turning back to Silas. "We depart for Varennia tomorrow via diplomatic channels. The coronation occurs in 5 days." She held his gaze steadily. "I need you beside me, Silas Morgan. Not behind, not ahead. Beside." With that, she returned inside, leaving him with the newspaper whose headlines heralded the very crisis they sought to avert. The black ink proclaimed a future that was rushing toward them, one where a small nation's fate hung in the balance, and where a frontier-hardened American seemed increasingly out of place. Yet her final words lingered, not behind, not ahead, beside. A position of equality he hadn't expected in this world of rigid hierarchy and ancient traditions. The European countryside unfolded beyond the train window, neat fields giving way to forests, then rising into the foothills of the Alps as they approached Varennian territory. Silas watched the transformation with quiet appreciation, understanding. Now why Elisabetta had spoken of her homeland with such affection. The landscape possessed a storybook quality, villages nestled in valleys with church spires rising above clustered red-tiled roofs. They travelled as part of a British diplomatic delegation, their presence obscured by the larger entourage heading to the coronation. Lady Marcella had arranged the cover with meticulous attention to detail, providing clothing appropriate to their stations and briefing them on the expected protocols. "We cross the border in approximately 1 hour," Elisabetta noted, joining Silas in their private compartment after consulting with General Keller in another car. From there, another 3 hours to Varenhof. She carried a small leather portfolio, which she opened to reveal several documents and a single photograph in an ornate silver frame. The portrait showed a family group, a stern-faced man in military dress seated beside an elegant woman, with 2 children standing between them. The boy appeared to be about 12, the girl perhaps 8, both bearing the same regal posture as their parents despite their youth. "My family," Elisabetta explained, offering the portrait to Silas, taken nearly 20 years ago. Silas studied the image carefully. The young Elisabetta was immediately recognizable, her determined expression already formed. The boy, Alaric, stood, with perfect posture, though something in his eyes suggested unease. "Your father looks formidable," Silas observed. "He was," she agreed. "Third generation of our dynasty, responsible for modernizing Varennia's infrastructure while maintaining our neutrality through 2 continental wars. Not an easy balance." Her finger traced over her mother's image. She was French by birth, brought a cultural refinement that complemented my father's pragmatism. The diplomatic corps was largely her creation. "And your brother?" Silas asked, noting the distance in the portrait between the siblings despite their physical proximity. Elisabetta's expression softened. Alaric was sensitive, intelligent, preferred books to hunting, music to military strategy, qualities my father never fully appreciated in a crown prince. "You were close once," Silas surmised, recognizing the complexity in her tone. "Until I became father's favorite," she confirmed. "Not for being female, but for embodying the qualities he valued: decisiveness, strategic thinking, willingness to lead from the front. Qualities traditionally considered masculine. While Alaric possessed talents equally valuable, but less visible," Silas concluded. "Precisely." She reclaimed the portrait, studying it with evident nostalgia. "We complemented each other perfectly, or should have. Together we could have balanced Varennia's needs. Instead," the train whistle interrupted her reflection, announcing their approach to the Varennian border. Outside, the landscape had grown more dramatic, rocky outcroppings and pine forests framing a narrow valley through which the railway passed. "My first sight of home in nearly 3 months," Elisabetta murmured, her attention shifting to the window. The border crossing proceeded without incident, their diplomatic papers examined with cursory respect by officials unaware of who travelled. Among the British delegation, as they pulled away from the border station, Elisabetta visibly relaxed. "Now we're on Varennian soil," she said with quiet satisfaction. "Whatever happens, I've fulfilled my promise to return." The final hours of their journey brought them deeper into Varennian territory, the scenery matching Elisabetta's earlier descriptions: crystal lakes reflecting mountain peaks, villages with distinctive architecture combining Germanic solidity with Italian artistic flourishes. "The eastern provinces," she narrated as they passed through a particularly picturesque valley, "known for wood carving and clockmaking. Those forests provide the special timber our artisans use for musical instruments, exported throughout Europe." Her pride in her homeland was evident in every observation, her knowledge extending beyond royal concerns to the daily lives and traditions of her people. This was not abstract patriotism, but intimate connection to a place and its inhabitants. As afternoon shadows lengthened across the valleys, General Keller joined them with updated intelligence. "We've made contact with loyalists in the capital," he reported. "A safe house has been prepared near the old city, where you can remain undetected until we're ready to move." "And my brother's activities?" Elisabetta inquired. "The coronation. Preparations continue at full pace. Security has been increased around the palace and cathedral." The general hesitated before adding, "There are rumors he plans to announce his marriage immediately following the coronation to Baroness Schuler, the Prussian mining heiress," Elisabetta noted with grim understanding, cementing both his political and financial arrangements in one stroke. As the train rounded a final mountain pass, the capital city of Varenhof came into view below, a breathtaking arrangement of white stone buildings and red-tiled roofs surrounding a central cathedral and palace complex. Sunset gilded the scene, lending it an almost mythic quality. "Varenhof," Elisabetta said softly, "the heart of Varennia." Silas observed her profile as she gazed upon her capital, the weight of responsibility evident in her expression, alongside genuine love for what lay before them. In that moment, he saw both the woman who had fought beside him through wilderness and danger, and the queen prepared to reclaim her birthright. "It's as beautiful as you described," he acknowledged, "and worth every hardship to protect," she replied, returning the family portrait to its portfolio as the train began its descent into the valley. "Now comes the true test of all we've endured together." The servant's uniform chafed at Silas's neck, the stiff collar a constant reminder of his disguise. The livery, grey with silver piping and the Varennian eagle embroidered discreetly on the breast pocket, had been obtained through loyalist connections still operating within the palace staff. It represented his final transformation in this unlikely journey. From ranch hand to royal servant, the ultimate camouflage in a world defined by rigid hierarchy. "Remember, eyes down, movements." "Efficient," instructed Anton, the elderly under-butler who had risked his position to help them. "Servants are meant to be invisible. If someone truly sees you, you've failed." Silas nodded, adjusting the white gloves that completed his disguise. 3 days had passed since their arrival in Varenhof, each hour spent in careful preparation for this infiltration. While Elisabetta coordinated with her supporters from the safe house, Silas had studied palace layouts and servant protocols, preparing to be her eyes within the royal residence. "The coronation rehearsal begins at 4, Anton continued, checking his pocket watch. "You'll be assigned to the East Wing reception rooms, where diplomatic guests are gathering. Listen for any mention of contracts, mining interests, or military arrangements." The palace exceeded Silas's expectations, despite Elisabetta's descriptions. Room after room of gilded ceilings, marble floors, and priceless artwork created a labyrinth of opulence that made Montana's territorial governor's mansion seem like a frontier cabin by comparison. Footmen and maids moved through the spaces with practiced efficiency, their presence acknowledged no more than the furniture they maintained. Following Anton's lead, Silas entered the servants' corridors, a parallel world of narrow passages and discreet doorways that allowed staff to appear and disappear as needed. These functional arteries behind the palace's grand facade reminded him of Elisabetta's revelations about court life, the visible splendor concealing complex machinery beneath. "You'll enter the diplomatic reception through here," Anton indicated, a small door nearly invisible in the ornate paneling. "Remember, silver trays for champagne, bronze for canapes. Never speak unless directly addressed, and then only 'yes, sir' or 'yes, madame.'" Silas's military training proved unexpectedly valuable in this environment. The ability to stand motionless for extended periods, to observe while appearing inattentive, to move with purpose while attracting minimal notice. Within an hour, he had mastered the invisible servant's glide across polished floors, tray balanced precisely at shoulder height. The diplomats and nobility who filled the reception rooms existed in a different reality than the harsh world he'd navigated with Elisabetta. Their conversations flowed around trivial concerns and subtle posturing, occasionally touching on the progressive changes Prince Alaric promised to bring to Varennia's traditionally conservative policies. "The mining concessions alone will transform this charming backwater," remarked a Prussian diplomat to his Austrian counterpart. "Though between us, the terms are remarkably favorable to outside interests." "Favorable?" The Austrian chuckled. "Highway robbery would be more accurate, but what can one expect when the buyer also controls the military guarantees?" Silas circulated with his tray, mentally recording details while maintaining his subservient posture. The servant's uniform granted him perfect invisibility among people who had been trained from birth to look through rather than at those who served them. By late afternoon, he had gathered substantial intelligence, confirmation of secret military, protocols allowing Prussian troops access to Varennian mountain passes, details of mining rights being transferred to foreign consortiums, even the schedule for document signings planned immediately after the coronation. As he returned a tray to the service area, a commotion near the main staircase caught his attention. A tall figure descended the steps, surrounded by attentive courtiers. Prince Alaric making his first appearance of the day. Silas positioned himself near a doorway, eyes downcast but alert. Alaric had his sister's features refined to almost feminine delicacy, the same dark eyes but lacking her directness, the same proud posture but with a studied quality that suggested conscious performance rather than natural dignity. He moved through the assembled diplomats with practiced charm, pausing to exchange pleasantries with key figures. "Your Highness," called a boisterous Prussian industrial magnate, "we look forward to tomorrow's glorious occasion and the prosperous future it heralds for all parties." "Prosperity built on friendship between nations," Alaric replied smoothly, raising a champagne glass. "Varennia embraces its future with optimism." The rehearsed quality of the exchange struck Silas as revealing, both men performing roles in a drama whose true script remained hidden from most observers. He recalled Elisabetta's words about court politics being layers of performance, concealing genuine power movements beneath. As Alaric moved toward the reception room where Silas stood, disaster nearly struck. A junior footman, hurrying with a fresh tray of glasses, collided with another servant directly in the prince's path. The crash of breaking crystal brought all conversation to a halt as Alaric stared coldly at the mortified staff. "Incompetence surrounds me," he murmured, loud enough for nearby courtiers to hear. "One wonders how anything functions in this palace." The moment created perfect distraction. Silas stepped forward with a towel, kneeling to assist with the cleanup, while positioning himself directly in Alaric's line of sight. Would the prince recognize him from descriptions provided by his American agents? Alaric's gaze passed over him, without a flicker of interest. Another servant, another forgettable face. The uniform had rendered Silas truly invisible to the man, who had sent assassins across continents to find them. As evening approached, Silas slipped away through the servants' corridors, making his way to the arranged meeting point near the palace gardens. General Keller waited in a modest carriage, disguised as a tradesman. "Well," the older man prompted, once they were safely moving through Varenhof's twilight streets. "It's worse than we suspected," Silas reported, loosening the constricting collar. "The agreements are comprehensive. Military access, mining rights, even provisions for administrative advisors in key government positions. Occupation without invasion," Keller concluded grimly. "But there's something else," Silas added, "something in Alaric himself. He seems controlled, almost as if he's following a script written by others." Keller nodded thoughtfully. "A puppet prince? That would explain much." As they approached the safe house where Elisabetta awaited their report, Silas considered the servant's uniform he still wore, the perfect disguise that had allowed him to witness the machinery of Varennia's potential downfall. Tomorrow, that uniform would grant him access to the coronation itself, placing him inside the cathedral when Elisabetta made her move to reclaim her birthright. Dawn broke over Varenhof with ceremonial cannon fire, their booming echoes rolling across the valley to announce Coronation Day. Flags bearing the Varennian eagle fluttered from every building, while the streets filled with citizens in their finest attire, eager to witness a historic transition of power. Within the cathedral sacristy, Silas maintained his servant's disguise while observing final preparations. His position, assigned to assist with ceremonial vessels, granted him unprecedented access to the coronation's inner workings. Most valuable was his proximity to the coronation's central symbol, the crown of Varennia. The ancient crown rested on a velvet cushion, guarded by two royal guards whose stiff posture couldn't disguise their pride in this duty. Crafted of gold and silver nearly 5 centuries earlier, its relatively simple design belied its profound significance. 8 points rose from the circlet, each tipped with a small star representing the original provinces that had united to form the nation. At the front, a single large diamond caught the light from nearby candles, fracturing it into rainbow patterns across the stone walls. "The coronation jewels must be prepared for blessing," announced the master of ceremonies, a thin man whose elaborate uniform suggested generations of tradition embodied in a single role. "The archbishop arrives momentarily." Silas circulated with practiced invisibility, mentally recording every detail to report back to Elisabetta. Her plan required precise timing, an intervention dramatic enough to command attention, but measured enough to maintain legitimacy. Too early would appear desperate, too late would be futile once the crown touched Alaric's head. The cathedral filled steadily with Varennia's elite, nobility in ceremonial regalia, diplomats in formal attire, military officers whose medals created constellations across their chests. Silas noted the careful positioning of Prussian and Austrian representatives near the front, while traditional allies like the British and French delegations found themselves relegated to less prominent positions. Shortly before the ceremony's commencement, Alaric arrived through a private entrance, accompanied by his personal guard and closest advisors. His coronation attire combined military elements with royal splendor, a white uniform adorned with gold braid and ceremonial sword, his chest crossing with the blue sash of Varennia's highest order. "Your Highness," the master of ceremonies bowed deeply. "All is prepared, according to ancient custom." Alaric nodded, his expression revealing momentary strain beneath practiced confidence. Up close, Silas detected signs of exhaustion, shadows beneath his eyes, tension in his jaw, that suggested the prince's journey to this moment had exacted its own price. "The crown has been blessed?" Alaric inquired, his gaze drawn repeatedly to the ancient symbol of sovereignty. "The archbishop performs the final blessing now, Your Highness." From his position against the wall, Silas observed a subtle exchange between Alaric and a Prussian diplomat who had entered the sacristy under pretense of offering congratulations. Their brief conversation, conducted in whispers while others busied themselves with preparations, confirmed his earlier impression. Alaric appeared to be receiving instructions rather than accepting good wishes. The coronation ceremony began, with a procession through the cathedral's central nave, bells ringing as ancient chants filled the vaulted space. Silas, now positioned near the altar with other attendants, had clear view of both the proceedings and the side entrance through which Elisabetta would make her appearance. The Archbishop of Varennia, resplendent in ceremonial vestments, delivered a lengthy address on the responsibilities of rulership and divine right. Throughout, Alaric knelt before the altar, head bowed in apparent humility, while the ancient crown waited on its cushion nearby. "We come now to the moment of investiture," the archbishop announced, his voice carrying to the cathedral's furthest corners. "Prince Alaric, are you prepared to accept the crown and burden of Varennia, to rule justly and defend her sovereignty until death releases you from this sacred duty?" "I am," Alaric responded, his voice clear and unwavering. The archbishop lifted the ancient crown from its cushion. Sunlight streaming through stained glass windows caught the central diamond, sending prismatic light dancing across the altar. "Then, by the authority vested in me by God and the laws of Varennia, I crown you—" "Stop!" The command rang through the cathedral, silencing the archbishop mid-sentence. Every head turned toward the side entrance where Elisabetta stood, dressed not in royal finery, but in the formal uniform of the Varennian Royal Guard, the traditional attire worn by monarchs during times of national crisis. Behind her, General Keller and a handful of loyal officers created a protective formation. "The coronation cannot proceed," she declared, her voice steady as she advanced down the side aisle. "Not while treason threatens the very sovereignty this crown represents." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the assembled dignitaries. Alaric's face drained of color as he rose from his kneeling position, the practiced confidence replaced by genuine shock. "Sister," he managed, the single word carrying complex emotions, "we believed you dead." "Many have worked to make that belief reality," she replied, continuing her measured approach toward the altar. "Yet here I stand, alive to prevent Varennia's independence from being sacrificed on the altar of personal ambition." Silas remained motionless against the wall, maintaining his servant's invisibility while carefully monitoring the royal guards stationed throughout the cathedral. Their expressions revealed internal conflict, loyalty to their oath, battling with surprise at the princess's unexpected return. The ancient crown, still held aloft in the archbishop's trembling hands, caught another ray of sunlight. For a moment, the diamond's refracted light seemed to form a halo around Elisabetta as she stopped before her brother, the true heir confronting the pretender, with Varennia's most sacred symbol suspended between them. The cathedral fell into stunned silence as royal siblings faced each other before the altar, centuries of tradition suspended in a moment of unprecedented crisis. Elisabetta's unexpected return had shattered the carefully orchestrated ceremony, leaving diplomats wide-eyed and courtiers frozen in their pews. "This interruption is most irregular," the archbishop stammered, still holding the ancient crown aloft, as if uncertain where it now belonged. "As is treason against the Varennian people," Elisabetta replied, her voice carrying throughout the vaulted space. From within her uniform, she withdrew a sealed document case. "I present evidence that demands examination before any investiture can proceed." Alaric recovered his composure, a practiced smile replacing his initial shock. "My dear sister, whatever grievances you believe you have can surely be addressed after the ceremony. This is hardly the venue for family disagreements." "This is precisely the venue," she countered, "when the disagreement concerns the future of our nation." She turned to address the Council of Ministers seated in the front row. "Honored ministers, I invoke the ancient right of challenge before coronation. By law, you must hear evidence of unfitness before the crown changes hands." The president of the council, Baron Talmberg, rose slowly, an elderly statesman whose loyalty to the Constitution exceeded any personal allegiance. "Her Highness invokes a valid statute, rarely used but still binding. The challenge must be heard." Alaric's face hardened, his gaze darting to the Prussian delegation, whose expressions had shifted from smugness to concern. "Very well. Let us hear these outlandish claims and proceed with the day's true purpose." Elisabetta opened the document case, removing a leather portfolio. "What I hold is a complete copy of the treaty Prince Alaric has negotiated with foreign powers, not the public version that will be announced after coronation, but the secret articles that reveal its true nature." She handed the document to Baron Talmberg, whose hands trembled slightly as he accepted it. "This treaty, bearing my brother's signature and private seal, surrenders control of our strategic mountain passes to Prussian military forces, grants exclusive mining rights for our scheelite deposits to foreign corporations, and accepts advisors in key ministerial positions who will effectively control our government." As the Baron began examining the document, Alaric's facade cracked. "These are diplomatic necessities. Varennia cannot stand alone in the modern age. We need powerful allies and economic partnerships. We need sovereignty and honor," Elisabetta responded. "Not protection purchased with national submission." The cathedral's atmosphere grew increasingly tense as Baron Talmberg passed the treaty to other council members. Murmurs spread through the assembled dignitaries, while the royal guards shifted uncomfortably, awaiting clear direction in this unprecedented situation. From his position against the wall, Silas noticed subtle movements among Alaric's personal guards and the Prussian delegation. They were positioning themselves for action, hands drifting toward concealed weapons. With practiced casualness, he adjusted his stance to maintain clear sightlines to both Elisabetta and the potential threats. "The document appears authentic," Baron Talmberg announced gravely. "These terms indeed compromise our nation's sovereignty in ways never publicly disclosed. A necessary modernization of our foreign policy," Alaric insisted, his voice rising. "Varennia cannot cling to obsolete neutrality while industrial powers reshape Europe. Modernization need not mean submission." Elisabetta countered. "Father understood this, that our independence requires careful balance, not wholesale surrender to the highest bidder." Something in her words seemed to trigger genuine emotion in Alaric. "Father, always father and his sacred principles. He never believed I could protect Varennia, never trusted my judgment or vision. He wanted you to lead, not sell what generations built," Elisabetta replied, her tone softening slightly. "This path dishonors his memory and endangers our people." As the siblings' confrontation intensified, Silas detected movement at the cathedral's side entrance, additional men in civilian attire but with military bearing, clearly reinforcements for whatever contingency plan Alaric had prepared. Without drawing attention, Silas shifted closer to the altar, positioning himself where he could intervene if necessary. "Enough of this theatrical display," Alaric declared, visibly struggling to maintain control. He turned to the Archbishop. "Proceed with the coronation. As Prince Regent, I command it." The elderly cleric looked uncertainly between the siblings, the ancient crown heavy in his trembling hands. "The law is clear," Baron Talmberg interjected. "When legitimate challenge is raised with supporting evidence, succession must be reconsidered. By full council vote, the council has no authority over royal succession." Alaric's carefully cultivated charm had vanished entirely, replaced by raw desperation. "The crown is mine by birthright. No Varennian monarch rules without the council's consent," Elisabetta reminded him. "That has been our way since the Charter of 1523. Alaric's gaze darted around the cathedral, noting the shifting loyalties evident in the faces of officials and guards alike. With sudden decisiveness, he turned to his personal guard captain. "Arrest her for treason against the crown. Now!" The captain hesitated, caught between conflicting loyalties. "The crown is not yet yours to defend," Elisabetta stated calmly. "Until invested, you command no royal authority." In that moment of hesitation, one of Alaric's foreign allies lost patience. A Prussian official lunged forward, drawing a concealed pistol aimed directly at Elisabetta. "Enough of this delay!" Silas moved with the speed and precision of his military training, abandoning his servant's disguise. In 3 swift steps, he reached the would-be assassin, deflecting his aim upward as the weapon discharged. The shot echoed through the cathedral, sending plaster dust raining from the ornate ceiling as the bullet embedded itself harmlessly above. Chaos erupted as diplomats dove for cover and guards drew weapons, uncertain where to direct them. Alaric seized the moment of confusion, snatching the ancient crown from the Archbishop's hands and backing toward a side exit, desperation replacing calculation in his eyes. "The crown is mine by right," he shouted, holding the ancient symbol aloft. "Varennia needs strength, not outdated principles." "Alaric, stop!" Elisabetta called, genuine anguish in her voice as she watched her brother's final descent into treachery. "This isn't who you are." 1 week after the fateful confrontation in the cathedral, Elisabetta stood at the palace balcony overlooking Varenhof's main square. Below, citizens gathered for her first public address as Varennia's recognized sovereign. The ancient crown, recovered, after Alaric's desperate flight ended in surrender, rested securely in the treasury once more, to be used for a proper coronation once the nation's immediate crises were addressed. "Your Majesty," General Keller approached with a formal bow, "the council has assembled as requested." "Thank you, General." She turned from the view, her expression reflective. And, my brother? Secure in the North Tower, as you ordered. Comfortable, but confined. The old soldier hesitated. The Prussian delegation has formally requested his release into their custody. A request that will remain unanswered, she replied firmly. Alaric may have lost his way, but he remains Varennian. He will answer to Varennian justice, not foreign interests. The council chamber fell silent as Elisabetta entered, its members rising in respect. These past days had seen frantic diplomatic activity, treaties nullified, foreign advisers politely, but firmly escorted to the borders, and delicate negotiations to restore relations with traditional allies. Your Majesty, Baron Talmberg began once she was seated, the emergency measures you implemented have stabilized our immediate situation. However, we face significant challenges in the mining regions where foreign investment has been withdrawn. We will develop those resources ourselves, Elisabetta stated, more slowly perhaps, but with proceeds benefiting our people rather than foreign interests. The discussion continued through practical matters of governance, appointments to replace compromised officials, security measures to protect borders, economic initiatives to reassure nervous markets. Throughout, Elisabetta demonstrated the blend of pragmatism and principle that had characterized her father's reign, yet with a compassionate perspective uniquely her own. As the session concluded, she noted the absence of one particular figure. "Where is Mr. Morgan this morning?" "I believe he mentioned inspecting the palace security protocols," replied Lady Marcella, who had assumed temporary duties as palace chamberlain. Elisabetta nodded, unsurprised. Since the confrontation, Silas had methodically identified and addressed security vulnerabilities throughout the royal residence, drawing on his military background to strengthen protections against future threats. He approached the task with characteristic thoroughness, yet something in his manner suggested a man preparing for departure rather than extended service. She found him in the royal gardens, examining sightlines from the public areas to private royal quarters. Despite adopting more formal European attire, he maintained the watchful alertness of a frontiersman, never quite at ease within palace walls. "Planning my escape routes?" she asked, approaching quietly. He turned with a slight smile. "Identifying vulnerabilities, old habits, useful habits," she acknowledged. "You've done more to secure this palace in a week than my ancestors managed in centuries." They walked together along a gravel path bordered by meticulously trimmed hedges, an island of private conversation amid the constant activity of palace restoration. "The council seems to be accepting your leadership," Silas observed. "Necessity, as much as preference. They understand how close we came to losing our independence." She studied his profile. "You've been making arrangements to return to America." It wasn't a question, and he didn't treat it as one. "My purpose here is fulfilled. You're secure on your throne, the conspiracy exposed, the immediate threats neutralized." "All true," she conceded, "yet I find myself wondering if duty alone explains your assistance throughout our journey." Before he could respond, a palace aide approached with a respectful bow. "Your Majesty, the British ambassador requests an audience regarding trade negotiations. Inform him I'll receive him in 1 hour," she instructed. Once the aide departed, she turned back to Silas. "The demands of rule waste no time asserting themselves." "As they should," he replied. "Your people need you." They reached a small clearing where a stone bench offered respite beneath ancient oak trees. Elisabetta gestured for him to join her. A queen's invitation, impossible to decline. "I've been reflecting on our journey," she said once they were seated. "From that burning cabin to this moment, the transformations we both underwent along the way." "You were always a queen," Silas noted, "whether in a frontier dress or royal guard uniform." "And you were always more than a ranch hand," she countered, "though you tried convincingly to believe otherwise." From his pocket, Silas withdrew a small object, A wooden horse, hand-carved with simple tools, but capturing the essential spirit of the animal in its flowing lines and alert posture. He offered it to her without ceremony. "I made this during the ocean crossing," he explained as she examined it. "Reminded me of Montana while surrounded by salt water and strange horizons." Elisabetta traced the carving's smooth contours, appreciating the craftsmanship hidden beneath its unassuming appearance. "It's beautiful, honest work from skilled hands." "Like Varennia itself, perhaps," he suggested. "Modest in size, but genuine in substance." She smiled at the comparison. "A diplomatic observation worthy of court training." "Just frontier directness," he demurred, "speaking truth as it appears." A comfortable silence settled between them. Two people who had shared extraordinary circumstances, now facing the ordinary reality of diverging paths. The wooden horse rested in her hands, a tangible connection to experiences that would soon become memory. "I won't insult you with conventional offers," Elisabetta said finally. "Court positions or diplomatic appointments would cage a spirit accustomed to open skies. And I won't pretend I could adapt to life within these walls," Silas acknowledged. "We both know where we belong, do we?" She met his gaze directly. "Or do we simply accept the roles assigned to us by birth and circumstance?" The question hung between them, laden with possibilities neither had allowed themselves to consider during their perilous journey. Before either could pursue it further, the palace clock chimed the hour, a reminder of immutable obligations. Elisabetta rose, royal duties reclaiming priority. "The ambassador awaits, and you have a westbound ship departing tomorrow." Silas stood as protocol demanded, the wooden horse now held carefully in her hand. "Your Majesty, when you think of Varennia," she said softly, "remember not just its queen, but the woman who crossed a continent and an ocean by your side." "I could never separate the two," he replied with simple honesty. Later that evening, as Elisabetta reviewed state papers in her private study, the wooden horse stood on her desk, a humble counterpoint to the gilded opulence surrounding it. Occasionally, her fingers would trace its contours, connecting her to memories of desert crossings, ocean voyages, and a burning cabin where an unlikely journey began. In her other hand, she held a sealed letter addressed to Thomas Whitman's ranch in Montana territory. Within, she had written not as a queen but as a woman, expressing truths that protocol and circumstance had prevented her from voicing directly. Whether it would ever be sent remained undecided, a possibility preserved but not yet embraced. Outside, her window, Varenhoff's lights twinkled in the gathering darkness, a constellation of human endeavor spread across the valley floor. Her city, her responsibility, her home. The wooden horse watched impassively as she returned to the business of ruling, its carved eyes fixed on invisible horizons, much like the man who had crafted it from memory and hope.